So it's 4:30. Ted, are you ready to get started?
Yep, I'm just starting the recording. The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Charter Commission Rent Stabilization Work Group will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Rent Stabilization Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. For the record, my name is Peter Ginder, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Rent Stabilization Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call a roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Perry?
Here.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
Here.
Commission Chair Clegg?
Here.
Co-Chair Sandberg?
Here.
And Co-Chair Ginder.
Here.
There are 5 members present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved, Sandberg.
Second, Clegg.
Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Perry?
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg?
Aye.
Co-Chair Sandberg?
Aye.
And Co-Chair Ginder.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. The first matter on the agenda is item 2, and I'm going to exercise some prerogative and just kind of give some more or less random thoughts as I've gone through this as we move into this discussion of this proposed amendment. Unlike the amendments that we've received from the City Council in the last couple of years, this amendment comes with a substantial research background. I hope, and I'm going to make a presumption that the members of this committee have reviewed the CURE report. It's very well done, it's very thorough, and it does a good job of raising the pros and cons. Both Commissioner Sandberg and I have added some additional materials to the file that supplement the CURE report. And as I said, it's a random thought. I don't know that there will be a lot of additional research that we'll need on this in light of what has been done by CURA. So that's kind of one of my initial thoughts that as we go through the discussion that I just wanted to get in background. Another thought that I wanted to just throw out as we start the discussion that is we're aware that there's a state statute that governs rent control for home rule charter cities. And I would just note that in the absence of that statute, this kind of legislative action would be typically within the purview of a home rule charter city, much like the city council passed the minimum wage or paid sick leave ordinances. That's where this action would lie in the absence of the statute. The fact of the matter is we have a statute now that changes how the city council and legislative function can move forward, and that's the requirements of a referendum. So with that kind of my initial background, I'm going to open this up for discussion on kind of what people think is whatever comments they have early. There are also some legal questions that are going to be covered, hopefully to some degree in, I think it's item 2.3 at time. We have that down for the timeline, but I think that will be one of the areas where we'll have some significant questions on how this moves forward and what our role is. So again, I will open the floor for any discussion.
I have my hand up.
Sorry.
Sandberg, I have my hand up.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I agree absolutely. Rent stabilization is a topic that in economics has been researched for decades. There's a ton of it. If that's all you're interested in, there's a ton of information about that. But I think what Commissioner Ginder is referring to is that this indeed would be in the council's purview but for that state statute. So I certainly hope we're not thinking about doing anything of further research into the economics of that topic. I would have questions down. My other questions under the legal part, so I'll wait on that.
Commissioner or Chair Clegg, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Yes. And maybe we should bifurcate the two rent control provisions. The one that just authorizes the council to adopt rent stabilization or rent control provisions, and the other one, which is basically a one-purpose initiative and referendum. I think the provision authorizing the council to adopt rent stabilization ordinances are clearly contemplated by statute. In fact, the statute says you can't do it unless you have such a charter change. But the initiative and referendum provision is much murkier to me. It is unclear to me whether we can have single purpose initiative and referendum, whether it exists anywhere else in the state or even in the country, and whether enacting single purpose initiative and referendum will accidentally get us into anything goes initiative and referendum. So I don't think the Cura report goes into detail about that, but that's some legal footwork that we need to get done.
Chair Clegg, I agree with that. I think there's real value in splitting up the two. With regard to the initiative, I know that a number of the cities that have initiative have some limitations in it, generally that they can't do zoning legislation. I'm not sure if that's because of the preemption of the Land Use Planning Act in Minnesota or otherwise, but I noticed that several of the cities have that exemption for land use. But there are other concerns with that and the whole idea and the value of initiative in a city that has never done it. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Chair Clegg that this should be bifurcated. I have a really strong concern about initiative and referendum, having seen it come back to bite people in other states. And I would hate to get into that kind of situation here. On the other hand, the first part of the amendment on authorizing the city council, I think is very well taken. It will open up the dialogue that many people have wanted for various charter amendments. And as you said, it's based in solid research this time, although of course the opinions go both ways. And I think it also is consistent with what we're trying to do with government structure, which is this is something that is totally appropriate for the city council. It's a policy, it's an important public policy to be considered, and this seems to be the right way to go about it.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. I agree that the referendum portion of this is pretty clear. There is, I think, in several people's mind, a little question about the way it's worded, because it does not appear to be clear that if the council enacts an ordinance, that it then has to be put out for a vote in a referendum. That language is, at least in my mind, is a little bit unclear. But I agree that there's value to breaking up the discussion on both of these items. And I'm going to also throw out to the floor is, I'm not sure at this stage people feel comfortable discussing those in detail, or if they'd rather wait until after we've, for example, had some discussion about items 2.2 and 2.3. Item 2.2 is the whether the amendments adhere to our adopted standards, and 2.3 is the whether the agenda, the timeline for legal review will also inform that discussion on both of those items. Commissioner Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back. I'm sorry you brought up another point, which I'm not going to address, but I want to go back to getting clarification from you that I want to understand that you and the rest of the committee are saying that the CURE report, which I'm assuming you're referring to the Ed Getz report, is that the?
I believe that's the author. It's the 130-page document that was.
Yeah. So I haven't read the whole thing yet. I was in the process of reading that today. I haven't read the whole thing. I did read the Freakonomics transcript, and it seems that they are coming to some different conclusions than Mr. Getz does, Professor Getz does in his initial analysis at the beginning of his report. So I'm not convinced yet that everything is clear cut on that front. I'm wondering if that is what you're saying, or I'm misunderstanding what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying that everything is clear cut. I'm saying there's been a lot of research done, and I agree with Commissioner Rubenstein that people will choose which side of the policy issues that they fall on. But as far as finding research, we're not likely to find a lot of additional research. In the Freakonomics report, if the one I believe you're referring to is one that I added to the library, that's based on a study that was done in San Francisco. That study is cited and discussed in the CURE report. So reports, there are reports on both sides that are compiled in the CURE report, and they list the pros and cons. And some people will weigh the pros more heavily than the cons, and some people will do the reverse. There's not a decision made on where we're going on that. It's just saying that there is a lot of research that we may not need to duplicate on this.
Okay, that helps clear things up for me. If there was someone who was willing to do additional research, would we be able to bring them into the conversation, or have them interviewed by this committee?
If you were able to identify a person that we thought was of value to the committee and they wanted to more or less address the committee or the committee, I'm assuming we wouldn't be able to find time for that or make that available.
Okay.
Co-Chair Sandberg.
I started out to say something else, but I'll go back with what Commissioner Perry is saying. I'm not convinced that we need to do any research at all. I'm not saying that that our committee is going to suggest supporting rent stabilization or opposing it, because I think that's a huge policy issue that would be for the council, if this is adopted, to deal with. There's lots of voices on both sides. But because there are so many voices on both sides, once we bring in one research person, how many others do we need to do to be fair and balanced, so to speak? I'm a bit concerned about that, but I would like to make it clear, and thank you for doing so, that even if we were to approve the first part of this, that doesn't mean that we've said we need to have rent stabilization in the city, because I don't think that is the issue here. The issue is who has the authority to do so, not what the outcome will be. So, my opinion. Sorry.
Chair Clegg.
Thank you. I think we should also be careful about lining up interviews, or we're going to have every advocate on both sides that wants to talk to us. I think people should be encouraged to submit opinions and policy statements and facts in writing, and we could then make them part of our record. But until we have a discussion about the work group plan, I don't think we should be saying that we're going to talk to anybody who wants to come and talk to us, unless we decide as part of that to have some sort of public hearing.
No, I agree, Chair Clegg. I don't want to duplicate the work that's been done in the CURE report or have people who've been cited in the CURE report come to testify. Their work is available. It's cited if you want to review that. As I did, for example, read the San Francisco report. If there are positions you want to explore further, there is a wealth of information in the CURE report. I don't believe that there's an action item to be taken on this at this stage on 2.1, but I guess we've decided informally that we should be splitting up the initiative portion of the proposed amendment from the referendum portion of that. And so I think that we can leave as is. I think there's an understanding of that. I don't know that we need a motion on that. Is there any other discussion on 2.1? Seeing none, I'm going to move to item 2.2, which is considering whether the amendments adhere to the Charter Commission's adopted amendment proposal standards. And Commissioner Sandberg doesn't know this, but I'm going to turn this over to her because I can now, again, cannot find the standards. So if, are there comments on that? Because I have again lost the standards.
I would be happy to read through the standards. Do you want me to just do them one by one? There's 6 of them.
I think in my mind, we could read through them to refresh people to see if this is a time to apply those standards to the amendment, or if it's just something to have in the background as we move forward in our discussion and for later on.
Okay, the standards are: 1, is the amendment germane to the charter? 2, is it well considered? And I believe, as Chair Clegg said, not half-baked. There you go. Commissioner Ginder, I believe they should be on your screen now.
I'll let you continue.
Okay. 3rd, is it clear and specific? 4th, does it interfere with or take away the rights of the voters? 5, is it consistent with state law? And finally, is it necessary to accomplish its intended objective? I love standards. Whoops. And I'll let Commissioner Ginder go back if he wants to see if there's any comments. I think this should be pretty straightforward.
Are there any comments? Commissioner Rubenstein.
Sorry. My only comment is I believe that it is fully consistent with our standards. I know we want to look at state law a little more, and I would defer that one. But it's exactly the sort of thing that needs to go into the charter under the circumstances. And it certainly does not take away any rights of the voters. So I think that this is one of the clearer examples, given that we are limiting our consideration simply to the actual charter change and not the policy itself.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there other members that want to talk, who would like to talk? I don't see any other hands on this. I think as we move forward on this, I think this will be a relatively straightforward application of the standards to this, because I agree with much of what Commissioner Rubenstein has indicated. The standards appear to address this issue pretty well, and then we're just left with a policy decision. Commissioner Rubenstein, is your hand up again?
No, the part, my screen erased the part about lower hand, sorry.
I'm going to move on from that to item 2.3, a timeline for legal review. I know that Assistant City Attorney Carol Bashoon is with us today. For members, I will let you know that I sent on behalf of co-chair and Chair Clegg some questions to Ms. Bashun along the lines. Several of the questions go to the question of, one of the questions is, the proposed amendment allows for these amendments to be adopted at a general election or a special election. The rent control statute talks in terms of general election. So how do we get from the general election to the special election? The initiative proposal at one point says, and I don't have the exact section in front of me at the moment, the initiative section on section 5A, that the council can do one of three things, which is enact the ordinance without change, which my question is, how can they do that if there hasn't been a referendum yet? And then 2, direct the clerk to submit a ballot question to qualified voters. 3 is direct not to submit a ballot question. And it seems to me only the latter 2 should be applied because there has not been a referendum yet. And there's a similar question with regard to the referendum portion of this. I did not ask these questions, but as I've done further research since then, I've noted that the number of voters that are required to sign the number of voters to sign the petition is substantially lower than that are required by most of the home rule charter cities in the state. So with that, if Ms. Bashun has some information that she'd like to weigh in at this time, I'd be glad to have her speak.
Yes, Commissioner Ginder, I do not have those questions that you posed to me. When did you send those over to me?
Sorry, I sent those probably 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago.
Okay, because I don't recall getting anything from you. Hold on.
I sent them on March 22nd.
March what, 22nd?
Yeah, so a week ago.
I know that I got them because I suggested to Co-Chair Ginder some additional questions, which I think he then subsequently asked. So,
and that was
I don't see
the second set I sent on March 22nd. That included Chair Clegg's questions, and then I sent the other ones on March 18th.
Okay, I'm not, I mean, I put on, I don't know where they are. I'm looking under, what email address did you send it from?
Carol.Bashun@minneapolismn.gov.
Right, but where did you send it from? Because I'm not seeing anything.
I would have sent it from my regular Gmail address.
Commissioner Ginder or maybe Chair Clegg, if one of you could resend that very quickly. I don't think
could
I
you,
copied on
could you
that.
resend that? Because I did not know about that, so I was not doing any research on that particular issue. I was looking at all the case law related to the initiatives. So that's what I was working on, but I did not know that there were any questions that I had to review. So once you send that over to me, I can work on that.
Sending. I just sent one. I can't remember which one I just sent, but and I'll send the other one at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
I'll resend both of them so that we have them. But it looks like we will need to delay that discussion on those items until you've had a chance to review those. I apologize.
Yeah, you did not send it to my correct email address. You put it carol.bashun and it's carolyn.bashun. So it doesn't get to me if you put carol.bashun.
Okay. So, okay. It didn't
So-
return or kick back either.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why it doesn't, but I've had people try to do that before, and yeah, so it's CAROLINE. So it doesn't get to me if you just put Carol.
Well, then I will apologize to the members of the committee because there's going to be a delay that results from my sending it to the wrong email address.
Okay, and I just wanted to note, I was just looking, St. Paul, they do talk about the percentage. They do 8% of the voters that voted for the mayor. This particular one talks about 5, I think it's similar to the petition to change the charter, 5% of a general election, which would be something like 11,000, you know. I mean, I was looking at 5% of the general election. Casey can let me know if this sounds about right. We had about 238,000 people voting at the general election. The last general election which would mean that 5% of that would be about almost 12,000 people. St. Paul, it looks like St. Paul does 8% of those who voted for the mayor. If we would apply that standard, it would only be like 3,700 people. So I just wanted to mention those facts, and maybe 5% of the general population isn't good enough, but those are, and I don't think we've looked at, I don't think the city council members or I looked at anything beyond St. Paul.
I would just note that if you look at the other home rule charter cities that have initiative and referendum, they're quite a bit higher, for example, and they split it between general and special elections.
Okay.
For example, Duluth there has to be 10% of the signatures for a general election and 20% if there's a special election. And it runs through similar things for Bloomington, Brooklyn Park, Plymouth, and St. Cloud. They generally differentiate between general and special elections, and generally the standard is much higher. But there, as I said, there are questions about the special election language here.
Yeah,
Statute.
I see some, I just skimmed through some of the issues. I know that the statute, the statute is confusing. I guess I was looking at 471.9996. I know that statute is very confusing. And I can look at that in more detail, but I can tell you that one of the reasons why you have 2 different ordinances is because the statute is so confusing as to whether or not you have to change the charter first and then send it, over and get it approved. And so that's why there's some options to go to the voters to have these things approved. So I can look at that in more detail, but I know the statute's very confusing. It's not clearly written.
And I will resend both sets of my questions to you.
Okay.
So that you have those.
Okay.
For them.
And is there a timeline for responding to that?
No, I don't. I don't want to impose on your other duties, but if you would come back with a timeline, that would be great. If you think you can do it in 2 weeks or a month, whatever your schedule permits, that's what we will work with.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Commissioner Rubenstein, your hand is up again. Commissioner Rubenstein, or is...
You're on mute.
Sorry. I was asking if we might get copies of the questions as well, just so that we have them as reference.
Sure, I will send them to the committee.
Thank you.
Co-Chair Sandberg.
Just one thing to keep in mind are the deadlines that we are working with. I think, I'm not positive, Casey will know better, or Maddie, but I think we've got till May 2nd for the first deadline, and then if we need to extend, the final deadline would be July 31st, something around there, give or take a few days. Casey, you may know better.
You're correct.
Okay.
So it's a practical purpose, unless we call a special meeting, that will be the April meeting where we'll have to ask for the extension if we need it. So we'll try to move as we can on that. And this kind of ties into item 2.4 on whether we need to do a public hearing on this. And so I'm going to open that for discussion on item 2.4. Commissioner Sandberg.
Well, as I said a little earlier, I spent the afternoon listening to the public hearing that the POGO held. All 140 some odd testifiers, it was over 3 hours, I think. The only problem, it was clear that people were told that this was about actual content of rent stabilization and not something just to put it on the ballot, put the ability to do so on the ballot, on the charter. So that was a little confusing because they wanted to talk about substance more. I'm assuming though that since they wanted to talk about substance, they would want to have the city council have this ability. So I don't know how they advertised it or so forth. There were a lot of individuals as well as representatives of other organizations, but I don't know what we could add with a public hearing just off the bat.
Chair Clay.
Thank you. Last year, we held a public hearing on the public safety question because the council asked us to, and the council skipped that step in the run-up to adopting a public safety proposal. It's my view anyway, that if something is coming from the council, it should be their job, unless they delegate it to us as they did last year, to conduct the public hearings. And I suspect if we conducted a public hearing, we would get those same 120 people with the same views. So I question whether or not it would be worthwhile. We should certainly let people comment and open the record for that and make those part of the record. But I'm not sure another public hearing would be valuable given what the council has already done.
Thank you, Chair Clay. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you. I just was going to agree with the other speakers. Again, because the public hearing would probably not address the issue, but would rather go to policy. I don't see much point to it.
I don't see any other hands up. I tend to agree with the commissioner that's spoken already. I'm not sure that there's a need for a public hearing at this stage, since the council has had one and has not asked us to have another one. But we can keep that in our back pocket. Commissioner Sandberg.
I should add that after listening to that, almost 95% of the discussion focused on what the council could do, what they could pass, the substance. Very, very, almost no addressing of a citizen kind of initiative option. In fact, there were two speakers, I think, that had comments about that. I think one was the downtown council, but that just said it was a bad idea. But I don't think the average respondent really was separating the two in their minds. And I'm not sure how that fits in. So just a thought.
I don't see any other discussion on item 2.4. And so my understanding at this stage, we're not going to set a public hearing, but we reserve the ability to do so if we want to move forward with one. And then item 3 is probably the meatiest thing we have on this, which is approving a work group plan in a timeline. And I'm going to do some self-flagellation. I don't have a timeline thrown up on this. And so that is my fault on this, is running this this committee. And so I'm open to ideas on what people would like. We've discussed the idea of splitting up the plan into the discussion into two parts, the initiative and the referendum part. We don't have timelines or exactly what we're going to look at. I know we're going to have a legal part of this, a legal discussion. We'll probably have a discussion on the pros and cons of initiative and what that means for the city. So what other topics we might have and timelines, I'm going to open that up for discussion. I think Chair Clegg, you had your hand up first.
I was going to suggest that with respect to the first question, that is authorizing rent control or rent stabilization in the charter for the council to establish policy. I don't think there's any legal research we need to do there. And I think we have most of the information we need, although we could certainly leave a period of time open for others to submit information to our work file. But I think we should certainly have a discussion about that, but I see no problem with us returning a accept, reject, or substitute by the 60-day deadline. The other question I think we should leave open now as to how much time we need until we get some initial responses on our legal questions.
Anyone else? I don't see any hands. I have a question for Commissioner Clegg or Chair Clegg. When you talk about the 60-day deadline, are you referencing the, I believe, the April meeting, or are you considering a special meeting? Because I think we would need that before the May meeting.
We could certainly have a special meeting if necessary, and I guess we would need that either to accept, reject, or substitute, or we would need one even if we wanted to request more time. So I would plan on a special meeting towards the end of April.
With that in mind, I'm going to suggest that our next meeting, which I'm going to set out, is probably a couple of weeks, and that would be to just have a fuller discussion or an outline for what we think about the initiative portion. And I don't know if that's something that the members feel we can do in 2 weeks, or if that's something that we set a month-long date out. So leave that in your head. I'm also thinking that we're going to need a month probably for Ms. Bashoon to come up with her work, and then for us to review that and come up with our own thoughts on how we move forward on that. So those are the two main things that I think we're looking at. And so whether that's a month or try to handle something more quickly, interesting thoughts from the committee. Chair Clegg.
I would just suggest we leave it to the call of the co-chairs. If it looks like there is something to report on in 2 weeks, we should have a meeting, and you'll probably know that. You know, Carol will get back to you and say, this is going to take me a week, or this is going to take me a month, and we'll know more. So I would leave it to the co-chairs to call a meeting at the appropriate time, and just suggest that Tuesdays at 4:30 are an established time that most people are used to. So
I think that's an appropriate idea. So my motion will be that the next meeting will be called at the call of the co-chairs, and again we will aim this for these Tuesday 4:30 times, and in between that, you know, committee members can have discussions, or if there's thoughts that they want to pass on about the initiative aspect or any other legal research, we can collate that as we're waiting for this next meeting. So if there's someone that would like to make a motion about having the next meeting be at the call of the chairs, I would accept that motion.
So moved, Rubenstein.
Second, Clegg.
Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll have the clerk call the roll on the motion, which is to leave the next meeting to be called at the call of the co-chairs.
Commissioner Perry,
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Sandberg,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Ginder.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
That passes. We don't have any further discussion. I did promise that I will send out the questions, the legal questions, to the other members of the committee and to the clerk so that they have those. But seeing nothing else before us, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.